welcome to this Four Pees Café. This is a Four Pees Café, which means that you can unmute yourself if you want and speak to me, which is an absolute honor, obviously. If you don't want to speak to me, you can also put something in the chat window, and in that case, Michiel will watch your question and will speak to me by proxy. You can test how many languages he can do. I think I can do at least one more than him, but as long as you can read it, I will answer. So welcome to this cafe. We are going to talk about Insoft Imp, and more specifically v12 of Imp. I actually do not believe it is going to take that long, but I always say that, so we'll see. If you have questions, don't hesitate. You don't have to wait until the end. I actually prefer that you bring up the question at the end of each topic. I have about 4 big topics that I want to do. I do have a presentation, but I'm not going to use it much. I prefer to show you the functionality in for real in the software. Let's see how that works. Actually, let me close my door here, because otherwise it's going to get really noisy at some point. Okay, so let's get going here. I made a presentation, like I said, mostly to afterwards also have something to go with the recording and that you can review, but we'll just use it as a short overview here. I did want to, because I don't know whether all of you know what Imp is, I did want to show you 2 slides on what Imp is. And what I actually did is I took the slides that I used to introduce Imp, I think 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. Because they were kind of good, so I reused those, and then I'll tell you what I needed to add onto that, and that is also what we're going to look at mostly here for v12, so the new version of Imp. So what is Imp? It is automated layout planning software. And then the goal is, as you probably know, to create layout plans, so imposed sheets. Imposed, you can talk about or discuss about the names for all of these things. We could talk about ganging and nesting and imposition and so on. We have a whole, Michiel and I did a whole cafe about the different terminology and which software does what. You can still review that on YouTube if you want to. So I'm just going to say imposed here. So the goal of Imp is to create very efficient imposed sheets. And to do so, not by using templates, but by using a configuration where you store information about the printers that you have and about the media that you want to impose on. And then Imp calculates what the most efficient solution would be. And it also, and that needs to be said because sometimes you have software that doesn't do so, it also creates the actual imposition, which means that it can also write either an imposed PDF file or an imposition JDF or a cutting JDF, or it can export the cutting file as a PDF or a CF2 or a DXF. Then the next question is, for what kind of jobs can it do that? And there the answer with Imp is quite simple. Every job, every type of job. It doesn't really matter whether it's bound or unbound. It doesn't matter whether it's rectangular or it's die cut based, so irregular jobs. Imp can handle all of them and create an imposition using all of them. What I did add since last time, and that will be quite a big focus of what I'm going to show today, is for many different market segments. Of course, they support commercial print. Even V9 and before supported packaging, so that was always kind of there. If you would look at the product evolution, what you will notice over the last couple of years is that they gradually also move into other market segments and support them more completely. And one of them is sign and display or large format print, whatever term you prefer. That was already possible in V9. You'll see now that I'll show some other new stuff that was introduced in V12. And then another market segment that I will show some more demo on is label. Yeah, so there is a widening of the market segments that are supported by the product as well, which only makes it easier to say what kind of jobs can you use Imp for. The answer more and more becomes, well, any kind of job in printing. So planning sheets, imposed sheets, and then the question is that manually or automatically? And is it manually? Yes. The people from Insoft don't like it when I say that it's manual, and I understand why. Because even Imp itself, which is a manual tool where you create the jobs and then create a plan, is already quite automated. You don't have to do calculations. You don't have to create the actual templates and import the PDF. You just set up the PDFs that you want to impose, and then the whole calculation aspect and the creation aspect is already automated. So you have Imp, which does that, and then you have Imp Flow, which goes one step further and which also which does it completely hands-off if you want. So there you can set up hot folders, you can supply the information you can supply PDF files, but I can also supply a CSV file or an XML file. The hot folders can get the PDF or they can get the XML. Everything can be in the XML, so you can use Imp Flow, which is the automated version, and not set up anything in Imp Flow other than an input folder, and then drive everything through an XML file. And on the other end, there is an XML file coming out again with information about the impositions that were created, so you can really integrate it using XML, and all you need is one hot folder that Imp Flow watches and where you can write the XML to. So all of those things are possible. Okay, so that by way of very short introduction. I don't want to go into all the details of what Imp can, because there are lots of people here who already know what Imp can do and are interested in V12 functionality. Go to the Four Pees website, or rather go to the Four Pees YouTube page. You'll find some cafe YouTubes, and maybe even, I think it's even pre Four Pees Café in some cases. So there are lots of movies there on the Four Pees YouTube channel, where you can learn about using Imp in commercial print and packaging, with a lot more highlight on the functionality of what you already found in V9. For the rest of this, I'm going to focus on what is new in V12. So what happened to V10 and V11? You have to ask Insoft that. For those of you who followed Imp a little bit, you will have noticed that V9 stayed V9 for a long time. It probably would have been more logical if it would have changed to V10 and V11 at some point, hence the jump to V12 now. Okay, so I want to, like I said, I want to mostly use Imp itself. And then the first thing that I had here was a small point. Oh, by the way, what I'm going to talk about here is 4 or 5 topics, but those are only the really big topics that are new in V12 and the things that are very easy to show and very impressive to show. There is a lot more that was added. So if you are running V9 or you looked at it at some point and you want to know, you want to really know what the differences are, look on the website, contact us, ask for a more in-depth demo. There are release notes for the product that have a detailed play-by-play of what is new in V12. So what I'm doing here is only the really big functionality that I wanted to highlight here. What you will notice, and by way of introduction, is that if you go to the product, the UI has gotten some work done as well. So it is a little bit more colorful, which makes it easier because the icons are often easier to recognize. There is a little bit more color in there, which helps from a structural point of view to understand what you're doing in there. It's not a really major difference, perhaps. It does make it easier to use the product, which I think is important. So I wanted to mention it here, and you'll see it as I do other things. So the first thing I want to talk about is nesting, and I'm going to go to parallels here, and let's see what we are going to do. So I have some stuff that I prepared here, and one of them has to do with this pure nesting. And given that I have a file that says demo start, I should probably start with that one. There. So this is Imp 12. The real structure of the application hasn't really changed, so you don't need to be afraid that you're going to have to relearn a bunch of stuff. In this case, I have a number of jobs in here, unbound jobs and irregular. So all jobs with a die cut or a cut contour, whatever term you prefer. There's a bunch of them. They're all animals. No penguins, sadly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a plan, and I'm going to show you what would happen in V9. So in the version that you should know, I really want to do nonstop. I prepared. I don't know if you've ever used that. If you haven't, that's a shame because it's really cool. So at the bottom here, there is a way to save defaults. So in here, what I've done for this demo, actually not what I have done. Ravi from Insoft was good enough to prepare all of this stuff for me, so I only have to use it, which is much easier than setting it up from scratch. So what you see in here is that a number of these presets have been saved, and so I can get back to the settings of the whole dialog by just selecting the correct preset. That's very, very useful, of course. So in this case, it selects one of the printers, it selects digital cutting, and under algorithm, I'm going to, for now, switch off pure nesting. And then I'm going to say, okay, and let's Imp plan this. You'll see that this takes a little bit longer. The reason for that is simple. I'm running this in parallels on a, by now, I think, 6-year-old MacBook Pro. I think I need the new machine that Apple just announced that would go much faster. Or a Windows machine, of course, but heaven forbid. So, so this essentially is what you would get in V9. Imp has done the nesting. So it's looked at the die cut shapes and it's tried to make an as efficient layout as possible. But what you can clearly see is that animals don't want to play with other animals in this example. Yeah, they only want to play with themselves. So I have one layout where you have the giraffes. That sounded weird, I know. And I have a bunch of other animals, but the nesting only happens for the same type of job. Yeah? And you understand easily that if I was able to also use this space in between the giraffes by nesting different types of job, then I probably would get a much more efficient layout. Yeah. And so in V9, this is the best that you could do. If I now go to V12 mode, so I do this again, I'm just going to do all the same steps, add the jobs here, and then add the plan non-stop, and the same preset. And this time, the algorithm, I'm going to leave this on. So include the new pure nesting algorithm, and let's see what Imp comes up with now. You can already see what's happening when you look at some of the background examples on what it is doing. But this shows it very nicely. Now the animals are not afraid of playing together. So all the empty spaces that I had in between the giraffes has actually been used to include all the other jobs. And so you get a solution for the same amount of jobs in only one layout, where before the best you could do was 2 layouts. And if I go back to my overview and we look at the total cost for these 2 plans. So plan number 1 is the one with the V9 algorithm, if you want. Plan number 2 is for the V12 algorithm. You can see that that one obviously is going to be much more efficient. Yeah. There was some form of this pure nesting algorithm in Imp V9 already, but it was not considered to be ready for prime time. In V12, this has been polished and is now readily available for you to use. And if you have, of course, it's only going to help if you have irregular jobs with die lines or cut contours. If you have that type of job, it could give you much more efficient layouts in the end. So that's the first thing I wanted to show. If you have any questions, like I said, don't wait until the very end. Feel free to ask as we go along. I'm just trying, meanwhile, to rearrange my Zoom window here because I don't have many pixels on the screen. Okay, so let's get away from that. Like I said in the presentation, I just have some summary of what I have here. The next one is a feature for print and cut of banners specifically. And the general idea is to create this type of scenario. So I have banners that are going to be printed, and I want to print every banner with a kind of a tier of tab that has metadata in it on the side. Yeah. And that means that I have to create this element. There has to be a cut line that goes around it. There has to be a perforation line in there. And what I'm going to hopefully show you is that in V12, you can quite easily do that. So again, I have some demo files for that, and those are the smart banner. And I have a CSV file to load all of the data here. So I'm going to say load from CSV. I want to load that from this smart banner and then open that in Imp. That's going to ask me what is the definition of the cutting and creasing stuff that is in there. And I should have those files correctly set up. And you can see that I have a bunch of these things in here. What you can also see, if you have good eyes, is that here at the bottom, there is already something. Something got added here. And where does that come from? Sorry, let me do that again. Where does that come from? Well, it comes from the Automark settings. So normally Automark settings are used when you create an imposed sheet. The Automark settings can be configured so that for each printer that you have, automatically all the marks that you need for that printer are going to be added on each imposed sheet. Here it is set up a little bit differently because I can also set up job marks, and those marks are applied to in my example, all incoming components. It could also be the only portrait and landscape stuff, for example. Yeah, so all landscape components get one set of marks, all portrait components get another set of marks. That's also possible. In my setup, all of the components get it, and there is a mark template, LFP tear-off mark, and that has been provided for that. And what I could do is now I can say import, import geometry from marks. Yes, that's what I want to do. And I'm going to say repeat for other components. And so that creates what I need. It's not very clear to see here. So I am going to create a plan, add all of these banners. And then I'm going to do the same and say plan nonstop. There is another preference set, so banners ganging on roll that I'm going to use. And that gives me the setup that I want. The algorithm in this case is set up correctly. All the options are set up correctly. So let me see what happens when I do that. Yeah, so that calculates a bunch of stuff. Let's look at one of these layouts because it's nicely visible here. So in this layout, you can already see that the cut contour was created. I have the tear off here. You don't see the mark here. Why? Well, the mark itself is only going to appear just like the bleed when I prepare to export to PDF. You can see that the preview changes. The bleed will now also be shown. And also all the marks are shown. And you can see in low res here what that means. If I export so let's save the PDF file to my desktop. That is okay. Let's open that as well. Yeah, so that shows you what was created. And if I now zoom in, you can see that it created this kind of tab with the correct line types on the one hand for cutting, on the other hand for the perforation. There is also a green line here. I think that's part of what I had on as options when I exported PDF file, so that could be off. But you can see that the correct marks were added here. This is the name of the job, and then based on some variable also I get a QR code which contains something similar. So that was exported automatically into the PDF. And where does that come from? Well, if I go back here and we close this job and I open the marks template for this, so that should be called LFP there, this one. You can see what was set up. The trim boundary has a mark around it, and actually here I have the job name and a QR code with information in there as well. And so those two are added on each, or added for each component, and based on that, Imp creates the geometry, the cutting and well, cutting geometry for those jobs. So that was number two, a way to create a tear off tab for banners in this particular example, but of course this technique could be used for other things as well. Let's go to number three. There is a new application that comes with v12 as well. It has a very specific purpose. So let me close this and take you to the correct folder for that. In here, I have a bunch of PDF files. All of these PDF files use the same shape. So if I I would know how to do that, I could actually do that. There we go. Can you tell that I'm not used to using Acrobat? So all of these jobs have the same shape. They have different colors and content, but the die cut is the same little hole here in the middle. And so what I want to do is I want to impose those, but what happens if I only have this? So I get a PDF file from someone or for somewhere that has, this is what the imposed sheet should look like, but it's just a PDF file that I could open and probably create an Illustrator. It's just a PDF file. It has the outlines of where all the jobs need to come, but this I can't use in Imp directly. And so this new application is going to help me with that. Yeah. How? Well, if I take this and I export it as a DXF file, so I could open it in Illustrator and save that as a DXF file, for example, or I already have a DXF coming in. I can import that DXF file. That asks me what, again, the names of the different layers are that you have in the DXF. So how are the cut, crease, and perforation lines indicated? And this is specific for DXF, you always have this problem. What are the units that are used in the DXF? So in this case, it is millimeter. And when I import that, what you can see is that two things happen actually, and I can look at options and show you that there is an option for joining tolerance, also for comparison precision. So the cut line that you have in the DXF is analyzed, and what Imp tries to do is first of all correct any cut lines that are not completely closed. So that's one of the things. And the other thing is that it also tries to identify how many different types of shapes you have in this imposed sheet. And so in this particular example, it figured out that there is only one shape, and that is imposed 20 times on the imposed sheet. And the cool thing, of course, is that I can now export, I had already done that, so I'm just going to overwrite it, that I can now export a CF2 file, and the CF2 file has a way of storing both the one-up and how that one-up should be repeated on the imposed sheet. So this Scourer app helps me to prepare a CF2 file, which can then be used in Imp to do a correct, to create a correct imposition. So let's show you the second part. Again, I have a CSV file here, so I know that if I go to Imp, I can say CSV, I believe it is version 2, but we'll see. Scourer, and then this bookmark gang. Let's open that. I'm very happy with that. Let's see what happens. So that gives me a number of these bookmarks. As you can see, all of them are very similar. They all use the same die cut. They all have a different content. So what can I do with this? Well, I can create a plan, add all of these to the plan. And now, instead of just doing an imposition as I would normally do, in which Imp calculates what the most efficient layout is, I'm going to say no. This one I have to create exactly as the layout has been defined in my CF2 file. So I have plan only with CF2 files, for example. I'll take non-stop. And then I can select the CF2 file that I want. And I think I have a preset for that again. Yeah, so selecting the flexo press in this case. Is it this one, or am I doing it wrong now? Let's see. Actually, I think it's the offset die cut, isn't it? Yeah, this is not flexo. That would be silly. So let's see what happens. There we go. And again, it is, in this case, it is not Imp that looks at the individual jobs and says, how can I arrange them on the imposed sheet as efficiently as possible. In this case, it is the CF2 file that identifies the single up die cut, and then also knows what the imposed sheet should look like. And I end up with a layout where the only thing that Imp did now is it placed the individual jobs in the slots that exists in the CF2 file. Okay? But what it did do, of course, is it did look at the quantities that are requested, and it will place certain files more than other files. You can already see that here. For example, the first one here is placed twice. I have one that is only on here once, this brown one also. So the amount of ups that you find of each job is manipulated to get the correct, or as close as possible, correct number of quantity that you want for each individual job. And what I can now also do, and I'll show you that on this layout real quick, is I have a tool to swap jobs, because sometimes, of course, you might say, oh, it would be better if all the green ones are together. And then maybe I want the type of, I want to go to the blue ones then, and this is very similar. So the swap job or swap component, if you want, tool can help you to then bring jobs of the same color. And I, of course, as always, I missed one that is greenish. It can help you to bring jobs with the same type of color together, which makes it easier to print on an offset press in some instances. Yeah. So Scourer helps you to look at an imposed outline, a die line, cut contour that may have multiple copies of the same job. And it will figure out how many different shapes you have and how many times you have them on that sheet. And it will prepare a CF2 file where you have a separate indication of the individual shapes, and then where and how many times those shapes come back on the imposed sheet. Okay. And then that CF2, if you plan something in Imp and you use the planning from LYT, which stands for layout, LYT file or CF2 file, that will use that information about the different shapes and the number of ups to then plan the jobs that you give it in the correct shape, because it will automatically identify the correct shape as well. So it will plan the jobs in the correct shape, and it will also adjust the number of copies so that you end up with the requested quantity for each of the individual jobs. Yes, that was number 3. So far, we're still, what I'm doing is still working pretty well. It's good. I'm not an imposition expert. Don't let anyone tell you something else. So, third big feature I wanted to show, I have one more that I want to pay some attention to, and that is label imposition. As I said, in Imp 12, there are now some ways of also supporting label imposition. You could think, why is that necessary? Why is that special? Well, in many cases, what happens in label printing is it is quite different in terms of how the repeats are created than in other cases, and mostly to do with the fact that you want to print these things on rolls in many cases. And so you have to be able to decide how the label is going to be printed on the roll. First of all, is the label on the outside of the roll or of the material or on the inside? And then what is the position of that label on it? And then there is a question of how do they need to be positioned so that you get an infinite roll where the distance between the labels is always the same. So there are some very specific requirements that you have if you want to do label imposition. And in V9 of Imp, you couldn't really do much with that. In V12, you now have a lot more options to deal with that already. It's not complete. There are still use cases where there is some more functionality that is needed, and that is something that Insoft is also aware of, but you can already do a lot more than you could before. And to show that, what I can do is I can import a job. You can, small trick, I have the actual job definition in XML. I could import that in here. What always annoyed me is that when I drag it on there, it's not going to work. If you rename your file to ppxml, you can actually drag and drop. So that is easier. So I have a label here. The label itself is not very interesting, at least I don't think it is. But what is interesting is that I can now go to the job properties to begin with. And in these job properties, so I have a flexo material here. What is new is this real unwinding. And this allows you to set the unwinding type of winding type. Different people use different terminology. And that determines how the label is going to end up on a roll. So is it printed on, is the label material on the outside of the roll, or is the label material on the inside of the roll? And then what is the orientation of the job? Is it head first, or is it going to be rotated, for example? And I'll, just for fun, I'll put it on head right for this job. Yeah. And then what I can do is I can create a plan and add my my label in there. And then we're going to plan this. And how are we going to plan it? Well, I'm going to use a preset again. So in this case, I have a die making and die cutting setup. So these are labels that are going to be printed on a roll. And then you also have a die shape for them. And I'm going to select rectangular nesting for this. I want the spacing between these labels to be identical between every two labels. Yeah? And that means that I want a roll where things are perfectly repeatable. And in order to get that, I'm going to do rectangular nesting. And I think that should be about it, except for under options. I have these three new options at the bottom. The first one says stack jobs only vertically, which means that I really only want to have columns. I don't want to create rows. I want to create columns. I then want only one job per column, because well, think about it. If you're going to print this on a roll, a larger roll, and then you're going to slice the roll in between the labels. You want labels to be only vertically so that you can print a complete roll after slicing it. And I'm going to indicate that this is continuous real. And that is an important one because that will make sure that the labels, the position of the labels is such. And so if you look at one of those columns, the position of the labels is such that the gap between two labels is always going to be the same. And I'll show you what that does. I have a nicer a picture diagram of that in the presentation afterwards that also shows it very nicely what I mean. But let's run this. So remember that I asked not to have had first, but I selected one where the label was rotated, and that is exactly what happened in this case. So where the label that I saw in the job was portrait, you can see that it has been rotated here to be landscape. And it's a little bit difficult to see perhaps on here. But if you look at the distance between these two labels, and you then compare that to the distance that you have at the top of the sheet and at the bottom of the sheet, well, this distance here in the middle is the sum, exactly the sum of the top and the bottom spacing. So if you print this continuously on a roll, the spacing between two labels is going to be identical. Yeah. And that is the big improvement that you have here, both the winding type to take into account how a particular job needs to be produced, needs to be printed, and the calculation of the spacing that you have in between labels is something that you could not do in V9, but that you can now do in V10. Like I said, to make that maybe, well, this is not so difficult. So this is actually the type of thing that it would look like once it is printed. I have the label itself, and then it's printed on a roll. This would be an inside one, but then the diagram that I want to show here, it's not very complex, is this one, and you can see that the distance between two labels, well, that distance, half of it would be now created at the top and at the bottom of my sheet. And if you print that continuously on the roll, it means that all labels are equidistant. They are always with the same spacing in between. And that makes it possible to do auto peeling and all kinds of other things, and gives you a neat roll of labels in the end. There, like I said, there are lots of other things that are new in V12. I talked about die line jobs, for example, the stuff with Scour and CF2. There are a lot of other improvements. For example, you now support in V12 arbitrarily rotated components in a CF2 file. So if you have different shapes on a sheet and they are rotated a little bit to get a good imposition, that is now supported in CF2. It wasn't supported previously. So there's loads and loads of smaller features and options that have been added. And in some case, some of the advanced options that were only, and that's maybe good to at least mention. If you go to, if I go to the folder, well, where Imp is, there should be something that is called, yep, Imp UI. That is a configuration file that has advanced settings. So sometimes there are settings that you want to be able to change things, but it's maybe not a setting that is used very much by all people. So instead of putting this in the user interface, it ends up in the advanced setting file. What you'll see is that in V12, a lot of the settings that were only accessible through this advanced setting file are now also in the UI. So they found their way into the UI. And together with the other UI improvements that are there, makes the thing a little bit easier again. Many more things that I could go into, but I'm not going to. Just to recap very quickly, and then I'll see if there are any other questions. But just to recap very quickly, interface improvements, as I talked about, then the improvements you have in the irregular nesting, where Imp 12 has an algorithm that can allow more animals to play with other types of animals, was the summary, I believe. So it can create much more efficient layouts, because a job doesn't have to be nested only with the same job, but it can, as you can clearly see here, nest indiscriminately all jobs together. So that can make a large difference. We talked about these tear off tabs for banners using marks that are added, and then a conversion of marks to cut and perforation lines. We talked about Scourer, which is this new application that comes with v12, where you have, I say comes with v12, be careful, this is an option. Whether or not you have access to Scour in your license depends on what options you have in Imp. If you want to know more, or you're interested in this and you don't have the correct option, talk to us and we'll be happy to help. But this Scour app that can look at a DXF or CF2 file that is simply a flat die layout, so without information of the number of shapes and the repeats, and that can identify the different shapes that are used and also create you a CF2 file that is structured for then use in Imp. And then the last thing we talked about is the improvements in the label workflows with the winding type or unwinding type support and the support for continuous real printing, where it's very important to keep the distances between the labels correct so that you really have a proper roll of labels when you've printed this stuff. Yeah. That's it for me. Let me see if there are any questions. You can maybe see that people were having fun. That's good. I don't see any questions. So if anyone has questions, type it now or hold your peace forever. Or just unmute yourself and participate in this very one-sided conversation that is also a possibility. But it doesn't appear that that is going to happen. So v12 is out. You can try it. If you don't have access to it, then contact us and ask questions. We'll be more than happy to give you a more in-depth demo or talk about the functionality more in depth. There are trial versions that you can use. Feel free to ask for that as well. We can provide you with that information as well. Good.
David, one question.
Yes.
Can we see your penguins?
Sorry?
Show your penguins, please. Where are your penguins today?
Well, there are no penguins because whoever made the demo files didn't include a penguin, Santosh.
The penguins are with you.
I have one question about Scour, and actually I might need someone from Insoft to answer that because it's about Scour. Is it possible to create sub-layouts via CF2 files and maybe combine two CF2 files on one print sheet?
Yes, it is possible.
Yeah, it is possible. Dennis, if you want to see a demo of that, like I said, just contact us and we'll figure out the best way to show that to you.
Regarding the sub layouts, it's basically, I mean, I don't know whether you're talking of small layouts on a bigger sheet. That's possible from 7-8 years. Is there from version 7?
Yeah. So definitely, I think that's actually a very good point. When we have people who we talk to about Imp, very often they ask for things and we have to say that that was possible for a long time. So there are always more options in the software than you will find by yourself if you briefly look at it. So the best way to really look at Imp is get in contact. Let us give you a first demo perhaps, But then let's see with your files and a demo configuration that we work on for you, how it can answer the questions that you have, because that's the real test. I mean, you have to be able to see this with your own files and judge whether it will work in your workflow. Yeah. So if you doubt whether something will be possible, or you've looked at the trial and you don't find how it would be possible, get in contact and ask the question. We will be more than happy to help.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. I'll write you an email or give you a call. Thanks.
Perfect. And very welcome. Good. So we conclude from this that the next time I get demo files from Insoft, there will be a penguin in it. That's what I remembered.
I'll take care of penguins next time.
Great. We also remembered that there is way too much new functionality in V12 to show all of it to you. I've shown you the 4 highlights that I thought were very important, together with the new UI that you could see while I was doing things. Have a look at V12, download it, ask us for a trial key or a demo, and we will be happy to explain that.
David, can I add?
Yes, of course.
As we talked about the small layouts coming on a bigger sheet, which is available for a long time. Even the swapping of jobs, which you showed, is there from version 5, long back, it's 2012 onwards. So even that feature is there from a long back. So these are the basic functions which are required in a print environment. And as you rightly said, we do an array of jobs, wide range of jobs on array of printing technologies. So a customer specific requirement custom demo would be much more, meaningful. So that's the way to go. I agree with you.
Yeah, I agree, and it's the same message we always give to people out there, is that if you really want to judge whether something is going to work in your environment and whether it can do the things that you need, then you need to spend a little time on a custom demo, and because otherwise it's not going to be clear. And with Imp, that certainly is true. In imposition, there are always more options than you think. And Imp has so many of them. So let us show you what this can do, and then we will be more than happy to do so.
Thank you so much for this initiative, Four Pees, and David, to you. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to hear you.
It is absolutely my pleasure. It's a very sunny day here, so I think I'm going to have a drink and go sit outside in the sun for a bit.
Absolutely, vitamin D.
I will see many of you again on the next Four Pees Café, undoubtedly. So for now, have a great day and enjoy.